When you hear the term AI agents, your mind probably jumps straight to sci-fi, right? Robots, sentient computers, the whole deal. But in the real world, especially for businesses building this stuff today, it's a lot more down to earth. And it comes with its own set of very real risks. So in this explainer, we're going to break down how you actually govern these agents, moving from just simple coordination to real, responsible control.
Okay, so first things first, let's cut through the noise. All the hype is screaming autonomous agents, these things that think for themselves. But the reality? What's actually being built in the enterprise? It's more like coordinated execution loops. Think less iRobot and more very sophisticated assembly line. And trust me, getting this difference locked in your head is absolutely the first step to doing any of this safely.
So to really get what we mean by these coordinated loops, we've got to talk about orchestration. It's a buzzword, for sure, but what does it really mean when we're talking about AI agents?
Okay, so at its heart, orchestration is basically just a loop, a really simple but incredibly powerful one. It works like this. The agent takes a look at the current situation. We call this the state. Then, based on what it sees, it does something. Maybe it generates some text, maybe it calls an API, whatever. And then it does it all over again. Observe, act, repeat. That's the engine. And this leads to probably the most important thing to remember, and this quote just nails it. They do not possess intent or judgment. They execute logic defined by humans. So let's be super clear. These things aren't having brilliant ideas on their own. They're not winging it. Every single thing they do comes directly from the logic that we gave them.
Right? But here's the catch. That simple little loop we just talked about, it has a dark side. If you just let it run wild, the risk doesn't just add up. Oh no, it compounds. It snowballs. Let's dig into how that actually happens.
Okay, so picture this. The agent is doing its thing, observing the state. But then, a tiny little error creeps in. Maybe it misreads a number. Maybe there's a tiny glitch in the data. Now here's the problem. The system has a memory, that state we mentioned. So that little mistake, it doesn't just vanish. Nope. It gets baked right into the system's memory. And from that moment on, every single decision, every action the agent takes is based on that bad information. A tiny crack just became a massive problem.
And that leads to what you could call a blast radius effect. One tiny failure at the start just gets amplified and amplified until it's affecting everything. And that is exactly why just setting up orchestration isn't good enough. You have to actively control it.
So, how do we fix this mess? Well, the answer lies in a really fundamental design principle. We have to separate the action from the authority to take that action.
All right, let's get our definition straight here. Orchestration, that's the agent's job. It looks at the world, and based on its programming, it comes up with a plan. It decides what action to try to do. You can think of it as the proposal. Hey, I think we should do this. But then you have control, and this is a totally separate thing. This is the gatekeeper, the adult in the room. It looks at the agent's proposal and asks, are you actually allowed to do that based on a strict set of rules? And this separation, it is absolutely non-negotiable. Why? Because as this says, if agents both decide and act, authority becomes unbounded. Think about it. If the same system that decides what to do also has the power to do it, well, you have zero checks and balances. It's a runaway train.
So, the tool we use to enforce this separation of powers is called a control plane. Think of it like the central command for all your governance rules. Let's see what it actually does.
So, what does this control plane actually do? Well, its job description is pretty specific. First, it evaluates all your policies. It enforces approval gates, so maybe a human has to click yes. It runs all kinds of validation checks to make sure the data isn't garbage, and this is huge. It knows when to slam on the brakes and stop or even roll back a change. And all the while, it's logging everything, capturing all the evidence you need for an audit. The agent can't do an end run around any of this.
And that last part, about capturing evidence, man, that is so critical, especially if you're in a regulated space like finance or pharma. As the quote says, evidence is not optional. You have to be able to prove why the system did what it did. It's not a nice to have, it's table stakes. This gets at a really common and frankly dangerous misconception. A lot of people think autonomy and intelligence are the same thing, but the reality is autonomy without control isn't a cool feature. It's a massive bug. It's just a recipe for more risk, not less.
Okay, so with all that in mind, how do we actually build these things the right way, from the very beginning? It all comes down to designing for governance from day one.
All right, so if you're on a team building this stuff, here are the non-negotiables. First, bounded permissions. Give the agent the absolute minimum power it needs to do its job, and not an ounce more. Have explicit stop conditions. Know exactly what needs to happen for the whole process to just halt. Make that control plane visible. Don't hide it away. It should be a first-class citizen in your architecture. Auditability has to be baked in from the start. And last but not least, you have to be able to roll back. It's not optional. You need an undo button.
Okay, and now for a really important disclaimer. Everything we've talked about here is to help you and your teams design these systems responsibly, to give you the right mental models. But this is not a green light to just go and deploy something. Every single system needs its own specific, rigorous review and approval before it goes anywhere near production.
So I want to leave you with one final question to take back to your own projects. Take a hard look at the systems you're building. Is their autonomy actually governed? Is there a real control plane in place? Or have you just built a really efficient way to amplify risk? Because honestly, the difference between those two is everything.